This is Being Human. I'm Richard Atherton. Jason Little, writer, coach, drummer. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Richard.
No, I'm delighted. So you're in Toronto, right?
Yes.
And you always grew up in Canada? You've always lived there, or?
Yes, grew up in a very small town, about 300 people, and then moved up to Toronto about 25 years ago or so.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So typical Canadian upbringing, pond hockey.
Pond hockey. I've never heard that term. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and anywhere there's a frozen river, frozen stream, frozen pond, frozen lake, people just emerge out of the snow and ice and play hockey.
And figure skate.
Mostly hockey. Small rural town, figure skating was frowned upon.
I just envisioned you sort of twirling around with classical music there.
Nope. The best skaters took it though. The kids that were really good at skating, they took figure skating because it really helps with hockey and balance and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hadn't considered that. So with hockey, you've got to be good at hockey and you've got to be good at skating.
Yep.
So what's most important actually?
The skating. Nowadays, skating for sure. Yeah, the game's different than what it used to be.
And fighting.
Not as much.
That was what amazed me when I went to so I played ice hockey on video games, and then I went to Chicago when I was training. So I started out as a management consultant with what was then like Arthur Anderson, and they had a training center out in St. Charles in Chicago, and we went out there and I saw my first ice hockey match, and we got to fight on the video games, and they actually fought, right? They actually had a fight in the middle of the thing, and the music played, and I was like, oh wow, this actually happened.
Yep.
And but that's less so now, right? Is that
yeah, it's there used to be dedicated enforcers, and now the talent needs to come first. So there's still fighting, but you can't just have a guy who just fights. They have to be able to play nowadays, and it's they changed the rules to try and have less fighting and stuff, but it's still there. It's just, it's interesting how the players police the game, right? So even when you look at rules in our organizations and stuff like that, it's there's still the unofficial, in the white space ways that we keep order in our organizations, and sounds crazy to do an analogy to hockey, but it's the same there. It's, that there's a certain way that you need to behave despite what the rules are, and if you don't, there's a consequence. Which
okay,
right?
And there's kind of unwritten rules about the fights.
Yeah. I mean, if you take a run at a star player, you better be ready for something, right? Because you just don't do that. It's like no one hit Gretzky in the 80s. He was the greatest player, and he had Dave Semenko there, and you just knew you don't hit him. That's just the way it goes. There's no rule that says you're not allowed to body check Wayne Gretzky, but if you did body check the best player in the world who was like 140 pounds soaking wet, Dave was there to back him up. Yep.
So where did you play? I know nothing about hockey, but now I'm interested. You played front or defense or what?
Mostly goalie.
Mostly goalie, okay.
Yeah.
And does that say something about your character?
It probably does. Yeah, it probably does. Goalies are known for being a little bit nuts. Like, who wants to stand there and get a little hard puck shot at their head constantly? But protector, and I was small as a kid too, so when I would play defense or forward, it would be pretty easy for anybody just to steamroll me or whatever. So goalie, I was pretty quick. I could move around a lot, and I just liked it. I liked the focus that it brought. Yeah.
I used to play in goal as well, not because I was small, but because I was very uncoordinated. Big hands.
Yeah.
Goalie coming cool. Yeah. So okay, so you grew up small town, you played hockey in goal, and then I'm just so interested in your educational background. So then graduated high school, you went to college, or what happened?
Yep, I took electronic engineering.
Okay.
When I moved up here. So I took a year of computer programming at a local college, and only took a year because it's first year of college. You don't go to school ever, and you party a little bit more than you probably should. And I figured, well, if I want to do something, I got to get out of this town. So I moved up to Toronto, where I didn't know anybody, and lived in a basement apartment with two guys and the one guy's daughter, and took electronic engineering, and then never went into electronic engineering. Went into computer programming and IT, and I did some circuit board manufacturing, which was the job that I was doing. I was working midnights while I was in school. So I'd work from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, go home, sleep for a couple hours, then go to school. Wow. And then after I graduated, I got into IT, started doing phone support, and then desktop support and server support, and then into programming.
Right.
Yeah. So that's 1993 to the year 2000, roughly. It's about as short as it'll get.
That's impressive. You funded your way through college, because is Canada like the States, where because in Britain it's highly subsidized. I mean, it's changed a bit recently, but it's still pretty subsidized, and you don't come out with huge debts in the way you do in the States. Where's Canada on that spectrum?
When I was going to school, it was the same. So it was OSAP was the name of the program, and it's a loan. It's basically a loan that you have to pay back. So people come out of school with a mortgage, basically. So I don't remember what the terms were, but it's fairly long. You pay monthly for 10 or 15 years or something like that. Which I'm not sure that time is right, but it's basically like having a mortgage right out of school.
Right.
So that's what right? And then you've got all your living expenses, because you apply basically like a loan, and you say what program you're going to and what your expenses are, and then they tell you how much you get. So most students back in my day would get another tuition. And then everything else was go get a job. So pretty much everybody I went to school with all had jobs. Like maybe some had 2 or 3, just to pay for rent and food and stuff like that. So,
wow.
Yeah,
you've always been a worker.
Yeah. Nowadays, I'm not sure what's different. I know tuition's pretty expensive, but I don't know how all that OSAP stuff works today by comparison.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I must say we've got kind of similar stories in that I also did electronic engineering. I also didn't get a job in electronic engineering. Became a programmer for a while, then jumped out and ran a cabaret club for a while.
Oh wow!
Then jumped back into and became a talent agent. Those were a wild few years, and then I went back into consulting, and I suppose some years after that, I eventually found my way to I suppose what we're going to talk about a little bit today, and that's lean change management and your book. So you did the IT support. So tell me about so you're famous for the book Lean Change Management, and certainly we can talk about that. And so where were you in that journey when you first had the idea for the book, or the genesis of all of that?
Part of the whole, I guess, if you want to call it a mindset or the mantra behind it, was I always worked in the service industry. I mean, even through, jobs in the end of grade school and early high school, was always in the service industry, either being a line cook or being a waiter or, cleaning warehouses, stuff like that. It's always been some type of service thing. So I think I just developed that helper kind of attitude. And it was the first enterprise coaching gig that I had, which was about 10 years ago or so, I think. And I was in a screaming match with the quote-unquote senior coach and a senior manager. So production blew up, and the senior manager is the one who's on the hook for it. And it's this
production of a website or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So big telecom, and it's their consumer-facing website that had a problem on it, and there's 13 different divisions that have to contribute to getting something out into production. So he wants to implement a checklist in the Agile software tool that basically says, I've signed off on this for all the different departments. And of course, the senior coach and any left-leaning Agile manifesto people will immediately see that as red flags, right? Oh, you can't do that. That's blaming and blah, blah, blah. But instead of coaching the person through it, she kind of started yelling at him, and he started yelling back, like F-bombs and all. And I'm sitting in the cube with this guy. She's on the phone at a different location. And I'm thinking, all right, I guess this is what Agile coaching is all about, is telling your clients that they're idiots. So I thought, well, there's got to be something more than just this Agile stuff. And after we hung up, I told the guy, I said, well, you seem like you really want to do this. So I'll put this up on the staging site. You can check it out. If it's something you want to roll out, just let me know. Because we own the tool. So we had admin rights to be able to change stuff. And I said, well, if you think this is going to solve the problem, like you seem really passionate about it, let's just do it and see what happens. And I never heard anything about it again. He just needed to blow off steam. So you would think a senior coach would recognize that. So that got me thinking about the whole non-Agile process part of change. And then I went to AYE a few months later, which is Amplify Your Effectiveness, which is hosted by Jerry Weinberg, Johanna Rothman, Esther Derby, at the time, Steve Smith, and Don Gray. And that totally opened 1,000 doors to the world of change. So that's the inception of the ideas back then.
And just for people who are not initiated with some of this language, so I mean, there are people when I talk about Agile who are like, oh, so what you mean, like yoga? Like,
yeah.
Right? It has no meaning for them other than it's sort of original meaning in English. So
yeah.
What the hell's an Agile coach, and what's Agile? You know, how do you explain it to people for whom it has no special meaning?
I will usually say something like it's a set of 4 values and 12 principles that help companies deliver better stuff for their customers.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So it's about better stuff, getting better stuff out of the door. That's how you would.
Yeah. Today's world, we need to be more responsive and adaptive, and it helps people get, products that will solve problems for customers to market sooner.
Right. Okay. And so an Agile coach is what?
Somebody that helps facilitate a company moving towards that state.
Okay.
It's basically a consultant that specializes in Agile. It's no different than a consultant who specializes in SAP or any other discipline. Okay. But Agile coach sounds cooler than Agile consultant.
Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're an Agile coach. You go on this AYE, Amplify Your Effectiveness, where you meet a bunch of other coaches. Is that right? And then you get opened up to these conversations about change.
Yeah. And there was everybody there. There were coaches, developers, testers, managers, a very wide mix of people, but people that were passionate about bringing positive change. And the first chapter of the book tells about the story about the first session I went to, which was about the Satir change model, around how we're in the status quo, and then some change happens, which is the foreign element, and then we descend into chaos. We hit the transforming idea where we start to make sense of this change, and then we go into practice and integration where we integrate this new change into our new status quo. Yeah. He simulated that with a physical session, and we almost got into a fight because we were, because we had to. I was in the old status quo, and we had to keep a person in the corner of a room. So we had to keep this person comfortable, maintain the status quo, and then the new status quo had to disrupt and try to bring that person to the other side of the room by creating some kind of change. And then there was a group of people who were chaos, and they just had to go crazy and make noise. And we physically built a structure around this person. We went around the hotel, and we got tables and chairs and desks and curtains, and we tried to physically build a structure to keep him in, and new status quo was pulling that stuff down, and we were trying to put it back up, and then we started shoving each other. And within 10 minutes, Steve Smith, who was facilitating, had to stop the session. So the power of, once you trigger a change, you can't control where it's going to go, has always stuck in my head. So from that very first experience 10 years ago, just set down the path of you can't manage and control change the way that most of the ideas tell us that you can.
Okay.
You have to work in the white space, put guardrails in place, navigate things, enable the early adopters, listen to the people we blame as resistors and hear their side of the story and have empathy for them. It's a lot more complex than just, here's your 8 steps towards change. Go create urgency as your checkbox in your governance. So a lot of that stuff influenced the book and pretty much my style.
Okay. And what would you say the main message of the book is?
Build your own approach to change that's contextual for your organization. So the ideas are abstract enough that if you're in a more kind of controlling, banking, telecom, big company, conservative type of culture, culture hacking and experimentation probably won't be received very well. And if you're taking that stance as the change person, you're just going to destroy your credibility. But you can't not do some of that stuff. You kind of have to find the line by pushing a little bit, but know when to pull back. And if you're in like a media company, you could probably do things that are a little bit crazy. You can experiment more. You can do more visualizations of the change. So it's sort of understand all the dimensions and the ecosystem of change, and then try to tailor your approach for facilitating that where it's going to help you swim with the current of the organization instead of against it.
Okay. There's a couple of terms in there. So experiments and culture hacking. So experiments has a specific meaning in change, and then maybe culture hacking. What's that?
Yeah, experiments. It's in the agile community in particular, you hear a lot of we need to embrace uncertainty, which is pretty frightening for people. So I like to ask people anytime I do a talk somewhere is who would leave right after this talk, go to the airport, and go, and then just fly there. And it usually scares the hell out of most people. But there's a few people that would actually do it. So instead of blindly embracing uncertainty, what do we do to reduce it? So experiments are, what's a minimum action we can try to see if that's going to get us one small step in the right direction? What's the visibility of the failure if it doesn't work? What's the risk of the failure? So try to think about not just doing a change activity, but trying something out where you're not exactly sure, but you have a pretty good idea of where you want to go, and then measure. Have some way of knowing if it's going the right way.
Right. And that's terrifying for some senior managers, isn't it?
For sure.
How do you sell that approach?
Usually just by doing it. And it depends on what your stance of a change as a change person is too. So if you're taking more of a facilitation coaching stance, you're trying to have your client or the person you're coaching come up with the experiment, and then try to push their boundaries. So if you're coaching someone who's more conservative, their experiment might seem really tame and it's not going to be effective. So you can kind of poke them to help them explore if they could do something a little more radical. Where is their personal safety in trying an experiment? One large financial client I worked for, the director of HR said, well, we can't really change anything about how we're doing this payroll project. Like, we can't use agile practices or a different delivery model. I said, well, you can, but what's really the problem? And it basically came down to, if he screws up payroll for 80,000 people, it's better if he does it the old way. It's safer for him to screw up by following the mandated process than to try something new. So great, then don't do it. Forget the change. I'll go somewhere else. I won't help you with this. I'll poke you, but ultimately it's that person's decision to do it. So trying to think about, it's like a teeter-totter, right? Trying to find the right balance of how disruptive the organization will allow you to be, when you should push and when you should kind of pull back and wait for the dust to settle.
What's a teeter-tosser?
Oh, you haven't seen those things? Like the little, the kids that they sit on either side and they go up and down on this teeter? Like a seesaw, yes, that, yeah. Okay,
a teeter-totter, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So work out where the person you're working with is on the seesaw, on the teeter-totter.
Yeah. It's always about balance. And culture hacking is just a more extreme version of experiments. So if you really need to shake the organization up, you have to do something drastic to reflect back the organization's behavior on itself. And then it will become aware and it will fix itself, which is, a deep topic if you look at complexity models and systems thinking. You can't change a system of people with a PowerPoint or a process model. You have to act on that system to watch it respond. And that's more extreme and less safe for people a lot of the times.
What's the most extreme culture hack you've heard of or done?
The most extreme one that I've done is pretty tame, but in the organization I did it in was like a grenade, which was people were being moved into an open working space, and they were coming to us as the agile coaches to say that they weren't really comfortable with it instead of their managers. So we're thinking, well, why are they coming to us? We're not the ones doing this. We're just facilitating it. And I put up a big visible sign near the entry of this open space working area that said, here's some green sticky notes. So write down good things on green on this side and write bad things on red. And the whole red side was just littered with stuff. People hated it. So we made that problem visible to the organization. And the blowback to that was, you're talking, it was pretty small. There was 20 managers and 5 directors, I think. And the amount of meetings we had, emergency meetings to fix this problem that we had made visible. And I got in a lot of trouble for doing that. But it was pretty tame. I'm like, why wouldn't you want people to be honest? I mean, they're humans. They're not cogs in a wheel that you're sticking in a machine, and they're pissed off about being forced to do this. Go fricking talk to them. Like, don't sit in your offices and debate if you put the monitor for them in the right spot. Go see what's going on. They're fricking miserable. So that's the point we wanted to get across. And so that hack was extreme, but when you look at what we actually did, it's pretty basic and tame. But in that environment, yeah, it was massive.
Yeah, that reminds me of doing something similar, which was inspired by your book, where I was working on a change initiative, and we took the work that we were doing and we created a big public board, a big whiteboard, rolled it into the atrium area in this company, and put our faces up. Who's involved in this change? We had all of the big things that we were working on, and then we had this box on suggestions, and it was just filled with abuse, like overnight, with people, effing consultants, and you're all clones.
Wow.
Just a huge amount of abuse on this board. And the person I was working with was like, Richard, we've got to take this thing down. Come on, why are you leaving it up? And I stuck to my guns and said, no, this is actually great. We're lancing a boil here. We're getting some feedback. We're being public about what we're doing. It's better we get all this stuff out and address it than take the board away.
Mm-hmm.
We left it for a few more days, and eventually the graffiti, we had to wipe it off a few times, and then eventually it just stopped. And then people started engaging with what we were doing, and kind of realized that we were taking a different approach, and we did want to go and talk to people about this stuff.
Wow.
But that was your fault, Jason.
It always is.
Took that from the book.
Yeah, the cool thing is that somebody's got to do that activity to break the barrier down. I was in a workshop a few weeks ago, and there were 2 people who I've known for forever. One of them is working as a coach in this organization, and the second one interviewed for them before they hired the first person. And she kind of went in, and they weren't ready to hear. They have a very similar coaching style, and they weren't ready to hear the type of message that she gave them in the interview. So it didn't work out for her, but it paved the way for this other guy to come in with a very similar stance. Now, because she disrupted the place enough for them to think about what they really wanted. And then the second person came in, and it was a perfect fit. And she obviously felt kind of bad for that. But then we had a conversation around, somebody's got to break that barrier down. Somebody's got to disrupt something to pave the way. And, if you're a consultant, a lot of the times, if you're the first person in there, you get the blame for everything. Doesn't matter what it is. The change probably isn't going to work the first time, and everybody's going to blame the consultant. And then then you're going to get fired, and the second wave is going to come in, and they're going to be a little bit better. And then the third wave is going to be a lot better, because now the client is primed and ready, and they understand what they really want to do. So a lot of the things in the book, especially with culture hacking, is to allow change agents to blow off steam, because a lot of the times it's a pretty frustrating, stressful job. Right. So if you can kind of do a culture hacking session in private with some friends just to blow off some steam about all the dumb things you see, that's a great way to keep yourself sane.
Okay. It reminds me of this idea of culture hacking. So I think of it on a grander scale. So what was the first music streaming service that the guy who helped set up Facebook launched and ended up in trouble?
Was it Napster?
Napster, of course. Yeah, Napster, right? That was sacrificial. But now we have Spotify.
Yep.
Sometimes so that for me is analogous with what we do as change agents in organizations. Often there's some sacrifice initially.
Yeah.
And then I think about some of the civil rights movements where these people, people sacrifice their lives in some cases.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you would rewrite about the book? It's been out how has it been out now for?
The first version was out in 2012, and then the current one with the yellow cover was October 2014. So 3.5-ish years for the rewrite. I'm not sure what I would change about it, because it took a while to sort of find the groove of the people who need a message or need something like this to kind of move forward. I guess a better way to explain that is I meet a lot of people in the quote-unquote traditional change world, and they tend to need a method or a model or a process to try something. Now that they've read the book that's very loose and unstructured, it sort of aligns with how they believe they work in the first place, but now it's okay, because now there's social proof that there's a framework out there that allows them to work in a more agile way.
Right.
So I had thought a few times around, maybe there should have been a little more frameworky, structured thing in it, but I think that's where a lot of the allure to the book is, that it's not a framework or a method or step-by-step. And the people who want to disrupt their organizations and make positive change, they just need to little ideas. They don't need a step-by-step linear kind of model. And the people who need that aren't the audience anyway. Like, they're not the people who would probably read it anyway. I think the only thing I would have done differently would be more stories from employees in the organization who were impacted by the change. Because a lot of it was from the perspective of us as the change team, and mostly me, trying to be as unbiased as possible, which you can't really do. You see things through your own lens, and that's the way it is. But if I would have picked up some better stories from employees about our style of how we operated, I think that's what I would have added.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting, as somebody I know who's an influencer of both of us, Dave Snowden, talks a lot about the importance of stories and narrative in change.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding people's stories, making sense of people's stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a place to start before designing an intervention, thinking about what to do.
Yeah.
I saw somebody at a workshop recently, and they created it wasn't it? It was taken off the Lean Change site, your site, where a story wall had been created with images.
Yes.
Was that something that you authored, or?
No, that's Sarah Baca. I hope I pronounced her last name right. So she, I've known her through the Happy Melly Network, and I can't remember how we got connected about this story, but I said, "Oh, that sounds like a cool story. Do you want a platform to tell it on?" Yeah. So she wrote that post and did that kind of journey diagram and pictures and stuff, which was pretty cool.
No, I love that. We'll definitely put the link to that in the notes for the show.
Mm-hmm. So go back to cave person days, right? Where we painted on walls to tell stories. And it really sounds dumb. People go, "Oh my God, send this hippie back to Canada." But that's how change works. It doesn't matter how advanced we get with AI and robots and whatever the future, everything in our organization is shaped through stories. always has been, always will be. That's how groups of people communicate with each other. We tell stories, we share ideas, we are very visual creatures. So the more we can get our thoughts out onto a wall and visualize it somehow, it helps us reduce uncertainty because we start to see all the cool things that we've done. You don't see that in the change program status report. Look at our quick wins. Like, it's just not natural for humans. And companies that are too afraid to do that and they think it's more about process, I'd argue they don't really need to change anyway. I've seen this so many times, especially with the big banks here in Canada and in telecom. They do their agile transformations that they've been doing for 10 years, and nothing's really different because they don't need to do anything different. They just need to put window dressing on to make it look like we're innovative and cool. And I get an email a month ago from my bank saying, "Did you know you can check your balance on your phone?" I'm like, I could do that in 1995 via dial-up. I had a floppy disk. I dial into my bank and I could do that. This is not innovative. Where is the $40 million you guys are spending in your innovation lab every year? Because I'm getting nothing as a consumer. So they don't really need to change. They can just make it a process and a step-by-step thing. But there's a lot of companies out there that want to make the world a better place, and they need stuff like this. So that's really who I'm trying to speak to.
And those companies don't need this now, but no one can know when they're going to need it. I mean, nobody knows exactly the year or when disruption happens. And yeah. And there's a whole bunch of
and there's a whole bunch of social proof behind it. You've probably seen this with your clients where they bring you in to help. But they go, "Oh, that'll never work here," and they don't want to listen to you. But as soon as you connect them to another client or tell them a story, they'll believe that story, but not you. Like, that's how social proof works, right? As soon as people see that more people are trying these ideas or they have a story to share, then they're going to listen to the idea. I even get this in workshops. The one you joined, where you and the two people joined the virtual lean coffee, right? After they heard you talking and the people telling the stories, then it was, oh, okay, so this guy must have something and they're there in the workshop to learn from me. But as soon as it's repeated back, I mean, that's where the magic happens with change. So the more we build community and the more we build relationships and networks, the more likely we can impact change in a positive way.
Virtual lean coffee. So for some people, that's going to sound like Mars. So, unpack that.
Oh, okay. So you get your coffee, and
you can't see the video. Let's just describe this mug, Jason.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yes, this is the My Little Pony mug. So my daughter's a My Little Pony fan, so I've got a My Little Pony coffee mug. So you get your coffee, and you have sticky notes where you write down things that you want to talk about in a particular theme, and then the attendees of the meeting, they vote on them, and whichever sticky note has the most votes, you put a little dot on the sticky note to vote for it. So whatever question or comment has the most votes, you talk about that for 7 minutes, and you only focus on that topic, and then when it's done, you move on to the next topic. So it adds instead of just having a random conversation, it adds a bit of certainty about what you're talking about and where you're going. So the virtual one is basically we just did a video chat, Richard and I, with a couple of attendees from his previous workshop, and then I had about 12 people in the in-person workshop. So we projected Richard up on the wall, and there we had a chat about what their experience had been since, because I think it had been, 4 or 5 months from that workshop?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, it was a good timing, and we've got another one of those coming up.
So,
it's a good way of. Well, again, it's back to stories. You're creating a space for people to share stories, and as you say, stories from people who aren't trying to sell or can't be perceived to be trying to sell you anything.
Yes.
So that's the social proof. Yeah. The other thing I'd say about lean coffee is it provides structure and it helps you. So I think of it as a way of managing energy, not just time. So. What I mean by that is because you have the whole room propose topics, and then the whole room votes on them. It's a really good way of understanding where the emphasis is, where the momentum is in the room to have which conversations, as opposed to when you might have done the exact same process and gone to all the people in the meeting beforehand and built an agenda, but that may have been a week or 2 weeks before the meeting actually happens. You get to that moment at the start of the meeting and maybe everything's changed and these people aren't so interesting. And then the second issue you have with traditional meetings is that maybe the guy who paid the most, his or her agenda items top of the list. And that might be appropriate, and it may be a problem. So the Bean Coffee democratizes it a bit as well.
Yeah.
So that's Lean Change. So what's next? You've got another book, is that right? Is that in the works? You're thinking about it?
Yeah, there's content for a whole bunch of different books. So there's going to be a part 2, which is going to be more of a story-based book, I guess. So it's going to be a collection of stories of people who have been using the ideas, a bunch of pictures, visual facilitation, more art side of change topics is going to be one. It's probably going to just be Lean Change Management 2 or something. I'm not exactly sure naming and stuff like that, but it's going to be what's happened since the first one. So what's the same and different about the commission since that change happened.
The commission, and explain that.
That's the name of the company in the book. So to protect the innocent. Let's change the name, yeah. And the other one is going to be something called Agile Everywhere, which is when I was going through my diaries and photos for Lean Change Management 2, I realized I've got 10 years of stories about Agile in marketing and Agile for running companies and all this stuff that I think would be good stories. Because I keep telling these stories through various conference talks and stuff, and I thought, well, why not turn this into a book as well? So those two for sure.
You said the art side of change. Is that right? Did I hear you right?
Yeah. So it's sort of when we're talking about the seesaw and feeling your way through it. A lot of it is it's more art than it is science. Our brains really want a structured method and a step-by-step linear progression through change, but deep down I think we all know it never works that way. So it's more about how to be okay with letting go as the change person, especially if you're coming from more of a project management background. I see a lot of change managers that come from a place of control or process because that's what they've done their whole career. They don't know how to work another way, but they want to because they know it doesn't work. And that's their words, not mine. I've had so many people that come from that background say, the old way, it just doesn't work. It's never worked. We've just fooled ourselves into thinking that if we have a good structure and a good plan and a good process, everything works out okay, but it never works that way. So it's to try to give more stories, to let people experiment and try new things with a bunch of social proof from other companies that have had success with it. And also thinking about getting away from these big binary, the change worked or didn't work type of thinking. Any company that's going through a digital transformation for 5 years, you can't say it worked or it didn't. That's just ridiculous. There's thousands of victories every week in a lot of these companies, and then they just sort of get sucked into all the glut of crap you see on LinkedIn, which is everything is doom and gloom, and every company's terrible, and every leader's an idiot, and all this type of stuff. And I think a lot of companies are doing a lot better than we give them credit for, as kind of armchair consultants a lot of the times. So why not celebrate that? Why not show a lot of really great stories that will help people realize they are doing a lot better?
So a celebration.
Sure, why not?
Of where change is working.
Yeah. The more negative people will say, well, you're ignoring the hard problems. No, not really. Oh, companies are dying a lot faster, so it's not working. Well, that's just the nature of technology, right? There's, my 13-year-old has a YouTube channel that's worth almost $20,000. He's building his own business And he's been doing this for a couple of years. So it's pretty easy for anybody to create a new company or a service or something. The barrier of entry is pretty low. So of course companies are going to die faster. That's just the way technology has shaped the world nowadays. So don't let all of that negative stuff sort of try to force you into changing. Great companies evolve. Great leadership has existed for centuries, and it will continue to exist after this kind of wave of agile and innovation is labeled something different. So,
you mentioned leadership there. I know you collaborated recently on a presentation, timeless leadership.
Yeah.
What was the message there?
Well, it was a lot of the stuff you see, especially on LinkedIn or social media, is take some of that with a grain of salt, because the world of consulting and agile coaching is just as cutthroat as the door-to-door salespeople in the 70s. Is that when you need to make money, you need to create watered-down certifications and all this kind of stuff to draw attention to yourself. But those card tricks and pony tricks, today's leaders don't need that stuff. It's existed forever. All of the leadership models that we in the agile community have kind of stolen and remarketed have existed for hundreds of years. So this session was about going back through the history of business, basically, and showing when these ideas were created, and examples of Ransom Olds in the late 1800s who invented the assembly line. People think it was Henry Ford, but it wasn't. It was the guy who created Oldsmobile. So he was the first person to do that. Henry Ford made it better. He just added the automated conveyor belt to it, and he gets all the credit for it. But some of the things that these leaders did to grow and evolve their businesses, that's what leaders do. They don't need a new model or a new approach because of this new digital world. Some things don't change. And great leaders have great relationships with everyone in their organizations. They know how to talk to people. They're very relatable. They see the bigger picture. One example that we told was when the auto bailout happened in the U.S. Ford didn't need a bailout, but they lobbied for it because Alan Mulally at the time knew that the ecosystem was bigger than him and his company. So if he doesn't lobby for his two peer companies to get this bailout, there's an 80% supplier overlap for those three companies. So he knows if I don't help these two guys when I don't need the help, when I need the help, they won't back me up. You're not going to learn that in a 2-day certified leadership course, right?
Yeah.
It's just...
Who's going to be able to give you some insights on that?
Yes. Oh, you should just be more agile with your blah. I'm like, come on. It's been around forever. So a lot of it was just sort of trying to show people who get duped by a lot of these quick fix schemes that come out of especially the agile world is pretty guilty of this. There's other places to look. Let's stop and look around instead of always looking to invent something new.
Yeah. So what comes to mind? So Lao Tzu, he several centuries back, the great leader is he of whom the people say we did it ourselves.
Yes.
Servant leadership in a nutshell. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But we need to relearn these. But there's still value in these people reframing, recommunicating these stories and these ideas.
Yeah. If it's being attributed to the past. So if it's the thing I take objection with is when it's thought of, look what we invented, or it's something new. It's not. It's let's stop and look around at the things that are already there and amplify the good ones by not making it more confusing. I mean, if you look at Agile nowadays, my God, I couldn't imagine being a CIO in a company trying to figure out what to do. Like 15 years ago, there was 2 books and 40 people around the world that knew about this stuff. And nowadays, if you Google it, there's 10,000 different frameworks and tools and methods. Right. Where do you go? Where do you start?
Yeah.
So let's not keep adding to the pile. Jerry Weinberg, who's authored 60 some odd books, who's kind of known as one of the great agile thinkers, when asked about what his greatest contribution to software programming was, he said, "I didn't invent a new language." So don't add to the complexity. stop and look around.
But says the guy, you're about to write 2 more books. So how do you square that?
Because there are going to be more stories and ideas. They're not going to be, here's a new model or a new method or a new framework. It's going to be, here's what this company did to make positive change. Here's what worked for them. Here's how they morphed it and tweaked it and contextualized it and made it work in their environment. Yeah.
So that's your professional life. You're a drummer. Is that right?
Yep. Yes.
Tell us more about that. You're in a band?
Yep. Yep. So we are a 5-piece band, female singer, playing all original songs. So we our band is called Clever Weapon. So you can, if you search that, you'll find us on Facebook and Reverb Nation and everywhere with a couple of songs and videos and stuff like that. So yeah, it's I used to be in a band a long time ago. Then life got in the way for 20 years, and then now life is, got to a point where I can spend a little bit more free time. The kids are older now, so they kind of do their own thing, so I've got a little bit of extra free time to spend. And I have been playing in my basement for a while just to get the skills back up and stuff like that. And then there's a site called bandmix.ca or .com or something, and it's just a freelancer musician site. I thought, you know what, I really need to get off my butt and do something. So I recorded a couple of songs, put up a profile, and then the bass player for this band reached out and said, oh, we're looking for a drummer. Do you want to audition? And I said, sure. And then a couple of days later, he emailed me back and said, oh, well, we had a guy come in and it was a good fit and it clicked really well, so we're not looking anymore. And then 6 months later, he emailed me again and he said, it didn't really work out with the other guy. Do you want to come back and audition again? Because I recorded a video playing along to one of their songs just to show them. And yeah, I went and did that, and it was just an instant fit. Songs are fantastic. Chemistry was there. Yeah, and it just went from there. So we've played a couple of shows now, and we're in the middle of recording our first album.
Yeah. Any of your songs on the album?
No, because those are way better. I've got a couple of riffs and stuff. We share ideas through our Dropbox and stuff like that. But the 3 guys who write the song, the songs are awesome.
And then that started. So that started when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Was it music and hockey?
Yes. Yeah, I started playing drums, I think, in probably grade 10, I think.
So what's that in?
You're 14 or 15. Okay. It was about 15 or 16. I think I started playing. Well, first I started as guitar, and I was lefty, so it was just natural to play that way. And then it's so well. First, if you play that way, people are going to compare you to Jimi Hendrix. So, and it's really hard to find guitars. So I had a right-handed guitar I would string upside down to play that way. And then I just realized I wasn't really good, so I flipped it the other way, and then taught myself how to play with a right-handed guitar, and then got into drums instead, and then played with a couple of bands in high school, and then moved up here and sold everything for school.
And was it a musical family, or you just broke out and?
No one else in my family played, so I don't know where the music part came from, because both my kids are really musical. My wife, and she sings as well. She's got a good voice, so I don't know where it came from my side of the family, or hers either, because none of her family sings or plays any instruments. But yeah.
Okay. And you'll make it, so you're going to have the album. Is a tour in the offing?
We're going to do some local places here. So we did our first show was a week after I joined the band. So we did all original songs. We did 13 songs or something like that, and people were blown away. There's a couple of video clips up there, and when people learned that we literally practiced once for that show, they were totally surprised. So that really speaks to the quality of the 4 others, because I made a ton of mistakes, right? It's hard to learn that many songs in that short period of time. And they covered them up pretty well, so it was, yeah.
And are they following you? Because I know mostly they follow the drummer, but in some bands they follow.
Yeah, me and the bass player. So the bass player, the bass player is he did a lot of cueing. So it's funny how much being in a band is similar to how things happen in our organizations, right? There's a sort of way that you feel your way around for what's happening and stuff. And he kind of knew if I got lost in a spot, and he would count in, a gap in a song, or, he would do the head motions, or he would do some things to make sure that we all knew what was going to happen next, type of thing, if I missed a cue or something like that. So that was really cool.
That reminds me of a line I got from you. I don't know if you originated, but that change is a social movement.
Yeah.
It's something you talk about. And it sounds so. Yeah, I see the same metaphor in the way that a band operates. Right? I think you said this before. We think that change happens because the CEO says this, or whoever it is who's empowered says, "Well, we're heading to this place," and really change emerges in much of the same way that something might emerge in a band. Somebody somewhere takes some initiative, and then then they follow, and and so it's more like jazz than it is like, I don't know, steering a ship or something.
Yeah. It's very much distributed leadership, and what a non-cool way to talk about being in a rock band. But it's exactly how it works, right? There's certain parts where Eric, one of the guitar players, has to cue us in. There's sometimes Sherry, the singer, has to do something so we're kind of in the right spot of the song, or James, or Shane, or me, or just the way you count certain things and look at each other, and it's and I think all of that stuff helps change agents, right? The more you do kind of creative, whether you're painting or whether you're building models or building Lego or whatever it is, if you're doing something creative, it just unlocks a whole different vibe about how you approach change as a change person. You're not coming in as a robot with a project schedule and all this stuff. That you do need some of that stuff too, but a lot of the times it's more creative than we tend to think. So the more you kind of expose yourself to other non-business stuff and, be human, have a normal life, play sports, do whatever, those lessons help you bring organizations forward. So.
And Steve Jobs used to talk about that. I mean, he said something along the lines of, I've got a coder who also writes poetry.
Yeah.
Versus a coder who's just an engineer. I'll take the poet. And he had that message of bringing liberal arts into tech organizations.
Yeah.
And look how disruptive they were.
Mm-hmm. And it helps to bring that into your organizations, especially with your teams. Talk about the other skills that people have. Do kind of personal maps, which is a mind map of you as a human. You put that stuff on a wall with your team, and then you start to ask questions about other people. I found one workshop I did, one of the guys who came is an environmental activist, so he lobbies the government for electric cars and stuff like that. And I've known him forever, and I just had no idea about that. So it just brings a whole other dimension to change.
And why is that, do you think?
I think because we get to see people as people. We often, as change people, blame people for resisting change, or we blame people who are maybe have a different mindset than us, or they see things differently and we just think they're stupid or they don't get it. But once we see them as people, we start to understand and have empathy for their perspective and their view on things. And we still might not agree with it, but at least we can have a reasoned conversation around it if we see them as a person and not just as some change resistor in a spreadsheet type of thing.
On that, who's the most difficult personality you've dealt with?
people who are like me. I'm a self-professed control freak, and sometimes I hold on to my ideas too tightly, and especially when I was younger. So people that would have very, kind of strong opinions that were opposite to what my view was difficult to work with, and I've mellowed out a little more now. More wishy-washiness. So I'm very much biased towards action. Change happens when somebody does something. That's always the way it's been. And sometimes I take that more to the extreme end. So I work with a lot of coaches. So a lot of the times, if there's an event or something that happens, if you're in a group of coaches, somebody will say, well, how do we feel about this? And that drives me crazy because I want to hear what you think about it, right? If we are coaches and we know that, we're non-judgmental, you can tell me what you think and I'm not going to react in a negative way, but don't give me this, how do we feel about this basically says I have an opinion, but I'm too afraid to tell you. So just tell me what it is. So that drives me nuts if I'm in a group of people that is very wishy-washy or not wanting to act like to an extreme end. But I've learned to recognize my symptoms and inner feelings of when that control freakness is coming out, and I can sort of head it off at the pass nowadays.
What you said about jumping in really resonates.
Mm-hmm.
I've got that bias as well.
Mm-hmm.
People want to do analysis and think it through.
Yeah.
So you talked a bit about changing organisations and how you work with others. Can you tell me one change you've made about yourself that's made a big difference?
More balance, probably. So spending more time on non-work things, I think, has helped quite a bit. What else? Probably being more vocal, because I'm usually a fairly quiet person unless it's something that I'm really passionate about. So I think speaking up more if I am frustrated or angry or confused or whatever it is, and just being okay with it. Normally I'll just be, I'll just close myself off and go do something else. But now it's trying to be a little bit more kind of open in those types of scenarios. And when you work for yourself too, you're alone a lot. So doing more social things, just going to hang out with people for coffee or going to a club or doing something like that, just to get out of the house more and interact a bit more. So those things are probably the most things that I'm working on, I would say.
Where do you think the vocal point comes from? I definitely experienced that. Listening to the vocal word. Did you get that?
Yeah, it's more things like if something's not going well at a client site or even something at home, it is being okay with saying this is my view and how I feel about it. Let's talk, as opposed to just closing off and going, whatever, who cares? Yeah.
Is there a moment that you can think of where you've had a major breakdown and an associated breakthrough? Is there been a low point or a turning point?
A couple come to mind. So one personal, one, I guess, kind of personal / more business related. Personal one would be we were coming back from a trip, driving with the family in a really, really bad storm. So 100-kilometer winds and stuff like that. And that triggered anxiety with my daughter. So anxiety is something, it's always kind of there. There's usually an event that brings it out. And for her, it was storms and high winds. So, there'd be days when if the wind is 40, 50 kilometers, she's in our basement under a blanket not wanting to go to school or look out a window. So we were going to therapy for it, to talk about it, and we did a family session, and we were talking about just why we were there, what we wanted to do, and I think the breakdown part was, with having 2 kids with anxiety and one with ADHD and anxiety, just feeling like you did something wrong as the parent. So there was a pretty low point of thinking, well, what did I do to contribute to this? And you think of all those events when you got angry and you yelled at your kids, which everybody does, but you're not allowed to say it anymore because you'll go to jail. But you get that feeling that, oh, there's all these little events that, when he spilled milk on the carpet and I yelled at him, that contributed to all this. And it's absolutely not the case. It's all genetic in the way the brain works. So just feeling like a total failure and just breaking down. I remember it was the first time my kids ever saw me cry, and the look on their faces were just, oh my God, this is serious. But that was good because it was a good turning point for us to talk about this type of stuff. And it helped quite a bit. So it was basically, society trains you to act and behave in a certain way, and, don't be yourself. Be the best representative of yourself in public, and not speak your mind and not do the things that you believe are right. And that helped me help teach my kids that it's okay to be yourself and to do what you think is right. So a couple of weeks ago, my daughter actually saw a few kids bullying this smaller kid, and it was the younger brother of a kid. So they might have just been horsing around, but she marched right over to them. She's like 4 feet tall, tiny, and marches over to these grade 8 kids and tells them to stop doing it. And, and they say some mean things to her, and she says, well, I'm an ambassador of this caring program, and you're not supposed to do, she just, no fear, right? And she marched right into the office and told the principal about it, without any fear of, retribution from the other kids. Whereas we're always taught we should do those things, but it's sort of the unwritten rule that you don't, because you get labeled as a tattletale, or you get labeled as this and that. And she's like, no, screw this. They're doing the wrong thing, and I'm going to speak up. So that was pretty cool. So it's events like that helped.
Right. You being yourself.
Yeah, it makes it okay for them. Model the behavior, and then it makes it okay for them. And let them know that that we've got their back. So if anything happens, we'll back them up because they did the right thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've got 13-month-old twin boys.
Mm.
This is a powerful conversation, and will I have the courage to be open emotionally, and how will I find that?
Yes.
It's different for men.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. You're the protector, right? Like, you've got to be the strong one. You've got to put on the brave face. You're not allowed to do this, that, and the other because you're a man. And it really doesn't matter when you think about the big picture.
And of course, it's always an and there's value in fortitude and managing emotions, and there's value in letting go and having emotions come out. It's all valuable. Right? It's when we get stuck on thinking that one's right and one's wrong.
Yeah.
And that brings me to another question here. Is so I think that one of the ways in which society in general and organisations is changing is there is this sense of interactions between people are becoming open. It's more okay to talk about sexuality, to talk about feelings, to talk about sense of identity and belonging, and these topics that well, maybe explored in small pockets are starting to become more mainstream as a set of conversations. What do you see in the way that culture is changing within organisations more broadly, and how do you see this playing out in the future?
In organizations, I think a friend of mine, Paul Gibbons, he wrote the signs successful organizational change. We had a chat, and he was talking about how, 10 years ago, you couldn't talk about feelings and vulnerability in the boardroom. You'd get laughed out of the room, or happiness. And he says nowadays, because everybody's buying into this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in nowadays, you can't not talk about that stuff. So now you need to be a little, you need to be like yourself. You can't just put on your business suit and close all that stuff off. And a lot of the stories you hear, like what Starbucks did, for example, closing down all their stores to do quote unquote racial bias training, right? They closed 8,000 stores. Stuff like that would just be unheard of 10 years ago. But now we need to have these conversations to move forward as a society, and stop thinking that there's mom stays in the kitchen and dad works at the tire factory, and we've got 2 kids in a station wagon and a white picket fence and everything's perfect. The world ain't like that, never has been. But now we can sort of talk about how things are real, and how that runs our organizations when we accept people for their differences instead of stereotyping people and putting them in their little box.
Embracing the messiness.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's a process. A company will bring in a happiness index chart tool to see if their people are happy, and they measure it and they manage it like a process, which is crazy. But then after a while, it bridges them into making small little cultural shifts over time. And there's Google happiness index, and you'll probably find tons of stories about companies that are bringing in more of these fluffier ways of running their organizations compared to just making it about process and rules and stuff like that.
And that's the thing. It's the conversations that they generate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, anything else we've missed you'd like to talk about that's in your life right now?
I went to a really good workshop. It was nice to actually go to a workshop instead of running one for a change. And it was a 3-day transformational leader workshop. So if people who are familiar with Michael Spade, if people who are listening are in the Agile community, so Michael Spade and Michelle Madore ran this workshop, and a lot of it is around how transformation happens, and it's not a process or science, but there's a lot of spiritual, which that word scares a lot of people. There's a lot of different elements to how change works. And we dove really deep into your own personal leadership style, and where you want to work on, what are your strengths and stuff like this. And they had this big physical wheel on the floor that had all these different types of attributes, and we stood around it trying to figure out, after this, where do we want to get to? And one of the people in the opening circle said that she wanted to try to be more vulnerable. And that triggered something with me, because my brain was trying to logically think about how to move from one step to another step. And I remember the last coach I had said, I need to think more with my heart and less with my head. So I told that story, and then by the 3rd day I said, well, by the end of this, I said, I think I'm actually pretty happy with how things are going and where I'm at right now, and I'm okay with not knowing where I want to get to at the end. And I think that's helped me actually think more with the heart and less with the head. So we don't always have to feel like we need to improve something. We can be pretty happy with where we're at, and I am with where I'm at right now, in business and in personal life. There's lots of little tiny things I want to improve, but generally speaking, it's going pretty good overall. So for anybody out there, especially now in the social media days, everybody's posting on Facebook about their new car, their new TV, and look how awesome everything is. And it's not reality. I mean, everybody goes home and, there's no dinner and everybody's cranky, and just be okay with it. Just live your life and don't worry about everything having to be perfect all the time.
and I'm getting there and not knowing, and you don't have to know exactly what's coming next. What are the steps?
Yeah. And other people's perception too. You know, I blog on my Medium site a lot about these personal stories. And people are like, should you be doing that? You know, like you've got this professional network and book and stuff, and do you really want people to know that you have a kid who has ADHD? And I'm like, who cares? Yeah, we've been to therapy, so what? A lot of people have been to therapy. Why not write about it? Because then now it makes it okay for somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
And it's healthy. Anybody who's ever had professional coaching knows that it's hugely valuable just to even have 2 or 3, you know, personal coaching sessions with a life coach. It's an amazing experience. Do that every few years and write about it. It makes it okay for other people who are might be too afraid to do it. And it's not embarrassing at all. I think it's healthy.
You're giving me something to think about, because I do therapy every week, pretty much. And I reference it from time to time when I write, but I don't write about it a lot. This is interesting. Yeah. It sounds like you've really embraced sharing that as you go through.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And I suppose the shadow to that is the oversharing and the constant emotional outpourings, right? So I suppose there's the
it's minimal. It's minimal. I wrote a post called 28 Minutes, which was
you do that.
Yeah.
About in terms of, Sorry, Don, you were saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It's always just in pockets when it feels right to talk about that stuff. So not constant, but I wrote this post 28 minutes, which was the time it took to convince my daughter to get out of the house on a really windy day once. So I come downstairs and she's huddled in a ball under a blanket, not wanting to leave the house. And I just told the story of how that came to be, and it went out there. And it just, because there's nothing you can do. And being a control freak, it's pretty hard, right? I can't pick her up and throw her out the front door. You have to coach them through it. And back in my day, it was, you know, suck it up, buttercup, and your dad would kick you in the ass and throw you out the door. And now you can't do that anymore, right? So, So that the writing stems back from AYE, actually, where Johanna Rothman, she did a Reinventing Yourself session. And I said, I think I kind of want to do what you guys do. I mean, you do these awesome workshops, and you do this, that, and the other, and write books, and blah, blah, blah. And she said, just start writing, because when you start writing, you'll figure it out. Don't worry about the method of how you write. Don't worry what you write about. Just start writing and make it public, and you'll figure it out. Took 10 years, but it works. It's diaries. Diaries are great. I've always had diaries with every client just to write thoughts and stuff, and it just helps you formulate your how you view the world, which is pretty healthy.
Yeah, Tim Ferriss says the fastest way to improve your thinking is writing. I journal almost every night, thinking and just my emotional health in general.
Yeah.
But for you, it sounds like there's also something about making more of that public. Yeah, there was a partner on LinkedIn at one of the big 4 firms who wrote a post about his anxiety and how he dealt with it. I mean, that's a sort of 2018 moment, right? I mean, I think this is even 3 or 4 years ago. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating to think forward about what organisations will look like. Certainly when my kids or even your kids start to look for jobs. Yeah. Anything else? We done?
No, I'm spent now. I think we're good.
We got deep.
Yes. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it. Jason Listle, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.